Thank you again for bringing us together to learn, and especially to learn how we may prevent some of the Egyptian diseases. We pray for your Holy Spirit to guide us and lead us. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Yeah, diabetes is very common today, and it was also common in the time of the Egyptians. In my own family, my dad was pre-diabetic. He was diagnosed. And thankfully with him, he was able to treat it naturally through diet intervention and also exercise. He was a construction worker, so that the exercise part was taken care of it by his work. And so he really never suffered from the complications of diabetes. Now, in my wife's family, on her dad's side, they're all diabetic. I think there's 7 in total, 7 or 8, and they're all diabetic. And now we have a child, my wife and I, and so we're hoping that she won't become diabetic if we teach her the right way to live. So we're going to look at diabetes mellitus. And what do you think that means from the words diabetes mellitus? So what does diabetes mean? Well, dia means through. Okay, have you ever thought about what diameter means? Diameter is the distance or the measurement through a circle. So dia means through. Betes means flow. And mellitus actually means sweetness in the blood or urine. So it actually means sweet blood. You'll have sweet blood. Betes means flow. And mellitus means sweetness in the blood, sweet blood. Now, the Bible in Ecclesiastes, it tells us there in chapter 10, verse 17, it tells us that we should what? Eat for strength, right? Blessed art thou, O land, when thy king is the son of nobles, and thy princes eat in due season, for strength and not for drunkenness. So we eat for strength. We eat food, we digest it, and what happens? It breaks down into sugar or glucose. And why is that important? Because glucose is our body's main source of fuel. Main source of fuel for energy. And to manage that fuel in our systems, our body has this innate system to perfectly deal with the glucose that is supplied, with that energy, so that we can move, right? Our bodies were made for motion, for activity. And so we need food for energy. And so we should eat for strength. So what is diabetes mellitus? Okay. What do we read there? It says generally it is too much sugar in the bloodstream. Too much sugar in the blood, and that's referred to as hyperglycemia. Hyperglycemia. The body can't use the insulin produced properly, or it does not make enough insulin. Okay, in the case of type 1 diabetic, it can't utilize that sugar properly. It can't manage it properly. But there's also type 1 diabetics, and basically, they don't produce any insulin whatsoever. It's a problem basically with blood sugar management. That's what diabetes is. And so there are 3 types. There's type 1, type 2, and gestational diabetes. That happens during that period when a woman is pregnant. But after pregnancy, it usually resolves itself and the woman is able to manage her blood sugar properly again. But it also causes the babies to grow a little bigger than normal. Instead of having normal weight babies, maybe 7, 8 pounds, they're a little larger. They're more like 9, 10 pounds. They're very big. Okay. Now, the earliest recorded record of diabetes was in Egypt in 1552 BC. So it's not just a disease of today, it was also a disease of the yesteryear, in the past. I'll say in the past. It's also a disease of the past that was common in the past, especially with the Egyptians, especially with the affluent class of the Egyptians, the priests and their families. They were more prone to this disease called diabetes. What other diseases were common among the Egyptians? As you can see from the list there, arthritis, cancer, diabetes, heart disease, hypertension, and kidney failure. And this is what researchers found when they investigated mummified bodies of Egyptian priests, of the ruling class, of the pharaohs. They discovered these very diseases, and it's important to note here that heart disease, hypertension, and kidney failure are complications of diabetes. Okay? Complications of diabetes. And so these are basically, in looking at them, we have all of these diseases today, correct? These are all what we call lifestyle diseases. Lifestyle diseases. And so diabetes is a lifestyle disease. Now let's look at some statistics today. Recently, in 2012, this is what was found, and this was reported by the American Diabetes Association. You can go on their website, and it's diabetes.org, and you can get a lot of this information on that website. And these statistics are from that website, and it says here that 29.1 million Americans, or 9.3% of the population, had diabetes. Okay? And about 1.25 million American children have type 1 diabetes. Now, this is the important point that I want to make about this slide. You see that third point there? It says that 21 million were diagnosed, but another 8.1 million were undiagnosed. Now, in other reports, it stated that there are as many undiagnosed cases of diabetes as there are of the ones that are actually diagnosed. So I tend to believe that it's greater than the 8.1 million that's stated on this slide. Many people do not know that they have diabetes. They're walking around, but they actually have poor blood sugar management, and they suffer from some of the symptoms and complications without even knowing it, because they're never tested for it. And so the incidence of diabetes in 2012 was 1.7 million new diagnosed cases per year. And that's just a little lower, that's a little bit of good news, just a little lower than 2010 with 1.9 million. But diabetes is the 7th leading cause of death in the United States. But like I said before, it also leads to a lot of those other diseases like heart disease. What's the number one killer in the U.S. and around the world? It's heart disease. And so if you have diabetes, it will lead you, if you don't manage your blood sugar problems, if you don't take care of that problem, it will lead you to have heart disease. And you may suffer a heart attack or you may die from it. Also strokes and other things like that. So diabetes is really a very, very serious disease that we should really do something about and help people to prevent as well. Now let's look at some of those signs and symptoms. Okay, the most common signs and symptoms are these, and the first three, as you see there, are the most common ones. Now, it says there that the first one is frequent urination, and the medical term for that is polyuria. Okay? And basically what happens here is that because there is so much sugar in the bloodstream, your kidneys have to work extra to remove some of that sugar from the bloodstream out. And your kidneys need water to do this. And so you're losing a lot of water in this process, trying to remove the sugar from the bloodstream. And when you lose a lot of water, your body signals that it wants what? It wants to replenish that water you've lost, right? So you become really thirsty afterwards. And that's the second point right there, increased thirst. So frequent urination, because you're losing a lot of that water, so you have to go to the bathroom frequently. And you also increase your thirst levels because you need to replenish that water that you've been losing through urination. And so that's called polydipsia. Polydipsia. For some of you nurses out there, you probably know that. Poly just basically means much or more. So more thirst, more urination. And the third most frequent symptom and sign is increased hunger. How do you think that comes about? Well, yeah, that's one reason that we can look at, but your cells are starving. Exactly. The sugar remains in the blood. The sugar is actually not getting into the cells because the cells need the sugar for energy. And so what happens is that the cells are starving. So they signal to your body that you need to eat. So you feel hungry. And you eat. And so what happens? You actually get more sugar into the bloodstream, but it can't get into the cells because there's some impairment there, and we're going to look at that. Okay, so that's why you have this increased hunger. And that's called polyphagia. Okay, polyphagia. And so that's increased hunger. And the rest of them are usually diabetics. They feel fatigued. Over time, they start to have vision problems, so they get blurry vision. And as well as if they get any cuts or wounds or any sores, it takes them a long time to heal. It impairs their immune system. And they suffer from frequent headaches and also itchy skin. I remember many years ago I had a situation where I had systemic itchiness, and that's one of the things that they test you for if you have itchy skin, to see if you have maybe diabetes, but thankfully I didn't have it. No, it was, for me, I had itchy skin all over my body. It was systemic. But it was due to an allergic reaction.
So someone that does have diabetes, would they itch all over their body also, or just...
Yes, they would have itchiness. Several places in their body, yeah. And so these are the basic signs and symptoms of diabetes. Now, how do we determine if we have diabetes? Well, you need to get tested, right? And the ideal test is a fasting blood sugar test. So you can actually use a glucometer. You can buy one at CVS or one of these places, one of these drug stores, and you can test yourself. And if your blood sugar after 12 hours of fasting, it says here, if your blood sugar after 12 hours of fasting, that's the middle column there, is over 126 or higher, you have diabetes. It says here that the normal fasting blood sugar after 12 hours is less than 100. Okay, this is all according to the American Diabetes Association. Okay, what you see up there is according to the American Diabetes Association. And the normal range for them is 100. If you're diabetic, it's greater than 100 milligrams per deciliter. But that is not the ideal. That is not the ideal. Here at Uchee Pines, and many conservative physicians actually suggest that your level in the morning after a 12-hour fast should be no more than 90 milligrams per deciliter. Okay? Our reference range here at Uchee Pines, and many conservative physicians also believe the reference range should be between 70 and 90. So if you overnight you're fasting, right, and then you check your blood sugar in the morning, if it's not within that range between 70 and 90, if it's higher than 90, you already are starting to have some kind of blood sugar impairment. Okay?
So what if it's less than 7?
You're still not managing your blood sugar properly. You generally should have it within that range. And the other blood test that that's a finger prick test that you can do. It's also a blood test as well. For those of you that had your blood work done, you can look at the result and you'll see. But another test that's done from the blood is the hemoglobin A1C. And it basically takes the average blood glucose over the past 3 months. And how it does this is that you have red blood cells, and they generally live in your bloodstream for about 3 months. And they're coated with sugar, and that's how they test for the A1C. Okay? And generally, it says here, normal range is 5.7. And that's pretty much what we believe as well. If you go any higher than that, then you're starting to have some impairment in your management of blood sugars. You're starting to have some insulin resistance. But to be classified as a diabetic, according to the American Diabetes Association, it says 6.5 or higher. But we actually believe here, along with some conservative physicians, that it should be no higher than 5.7. Okay? So there's a standard that they have, but many others have a different standard. And we here have that more stringent, more conservative standard. And it's important to note that. Now, let me make this other point, now that we're here. If your blood sugar, you find in the morning that it's creeping above 90 consistently, you increase your risk. You increase your risk of developing those other diseases that we talked about. You increase your risk of heart disease, strokes, heart attacks. You increase your risk of, what was some of the others? You increase, well, it's not cancer, it's kidney failure. You increase your risk of kidney failure and some other things that we're going to look at, some other complications. So, and the further you get away from that 90, the greater your risk increases. You understand that? So you want to try and keep it within that range at all times. And you can do that by following God's plan, and we're going to talk about that. All right. Is there anything you need to know from that?
As far as tests go, can you go to the store and buy, or do you have to go to a doctor to get
No.
it done?
No. You can go to any of those stores like CVS and some of the others, Walgreens, Walmart, and you can get a glucometer. Now, the glucometers themselves are cheap. It's the test strips that are expensive.
But that's not the A1C test.
No, that's not the A1C test. The A1C test is a test that you need to get done through a lab. Okay, you need to have your blood drawn, and then they need to analyze your blood for that test. So yeah. Okay.
Does your blood sugar results really differ by maybe your size, or does it differ for certain people, or is it the same?
That blood sugar range there is for basically everyone, regardless of your size. You should aim always for the ideal. And the ideal range is between 70 and 90. Okay? That's what everyone should be aiming for. Now, let's look at these different types of diabetes. And we're going to look basically at just type 1 and type 2. But we'll spend most of our time on type 2. And with type 1 diabetes, as you see from the slide, it's less common than type 1. Okay, it's known as juvenile diabetes, as it occurs mostly in children, but now many adults are coming down with this type as well. But in the past, it was referred to as juvenile diabetes. It's a deficiency of insulin. That's really what it is. The pancreas no longer produces and secretes insulin, so therefore you need to get insulin from an outside source. And that's why you see children, juveniles, injecting themselves or their parents injecting them with insulin. Approximately 1.25 million American children and adults have type 1 diabetes. It's less common. It's less common. Now, let's look at some physiology behind this type of diabetes. It's a loss of the insulin-producing beta cells of the islets of Langerhans in the pancreas, and this leads to insulin deficiency. So these cells that are in your pancreas, they stop producing. They're damaged or we lose them. Okay, and I'm going to explain how we lose them. And the body's own immune system, which normally fights harmful bacteria, like viruses, destroys these insulin-producing cells in the pancreas. Okay, so you lose them. They get lost. The immune system attacks them. Okay, the immune system attacks viruses. Is that not true? Okay, but what's really happening here? Because we're going to look at some of the risk factors, and some of them are environmental factors like pathogens and antigens. Okay? Exposure to certain viruses like Epstein-Barr. And one of the things that we're looking at here as far as risk factors, and this is a big one for me, is early exposure to cow's milk. Bovine beta casein. Okay, casein is a milk protein. Okay, and the other one here, another risk factor is low vitamin D levels. So we should get our sunshine. And drinking water that contains nitrates, and also genetics plays a part in it. But let me explain to you this issue with cow's milk and the protein as being a risk factor. These are all risk factors, but let's spend some time here on dairy. Now, what happens is that with this bovine protein, beta protein, your body sees it as a foreign invader. Okay? And your immune system decides that it needs to be destroyed. It's a foreign invader. So it starts attacking it. But this beta protein, this beta cow's protein, it looks so similar to the beta cell. The beta cells in your pancreas that actually produce and secrete the insulin. So it mistakes it for the cow's protein. And so it attacks itself. It attacks its own self. It attacks that beta cell. And it destroys them. I have a friend back home in Toronto who has 3 young children. And the 2 older boys came down with type 1 diabetes. Okay? When they were about 7 or 8 years old, respectively. And I shared this information with him. And I asked him, I go, Tom, what do your children eat? And so he told me every night they get milk chocolate. They love to eat cheese. So they get cheese for lunch. Their mother packs them a lunch to take to school. And so he told me that they're eating a lot of cheese, a lot of dairy. And so I told him about this study. And this was right before his second son came down with type 1 diabetes. Now he has a third child, a third son. Do you think that son is going to come down with type 1 diabetes? The likelihood is there. The risk is really there because genetically, they're also predisposed to this disease, type 1 diabetes. All 3 of the children will likely have. 2 of them already have it. The third one may likely come down with it as well if he doesn't change their lifestyle. And so, dairy, cheese, anything from a cow is really not that good for you. And so I really want you to take note of that. And researchers in 1992 found that a specific dairy protein sparks an autoimmune reaction, which is believed to be what destroys the insulin-producing cells of the pancreas. And a most recent study in 2002 confirms that link. Should be that link. Okay, and if you want, I can give you this study. I have it here on my PowerPoint, and you can read it for yourself. There's a definite link. Now, what about type 2 diabetes? This is the most common. As we read, 29.1 million Americans have this type of diabetes. And 90% of diabetics are type 2 diabetics. It's characterized by high levels of sugar in the blood, and that's known as hyperglycemia. And what happens is that the body does not use insulin properly. The tissues and cells have become resistant to insulin. And how does that happen? The pancreas is the one that produces and releases insulin, but the tissues and the cells of a diabetic person have become resistant to the insulin so that insulin cannot bring sugar into the cells. See, for sugar to get into the cells, they must bind to insulin. And then the insulin takes the sugar with it, okay, and it knocks on the doors of the cell. The cell, if you can think of a cell as a circle that has many doors, and you can think of these doors, these doors are referred to as insulin receptors. So you have sugar, you have insulin, and you have insulin receptors that are in the cells. So the sugar binds to the insulin, or the insulin binds to the sugar, and it takes it to the cell. And the cell has a lock, okay, a door. And the door has a lock, and the sugar and the insulin tries to get in. But that lock is faulty. The insulin receptors won't allow the sugar in. Do you understand that? Am I explaining that properly? Okay. Sorry?
If you have like a salad with those kind of picture, that would be much better.
Yes. Next time I will have a picture. But I do have some pictures here. We're going to look at some of those. How it all works with fat in your system. Okay, but that's what happens. Your cell is like a castle. It's a fortified castle, and there are certain doors that only certain molecules can get into. And so for insulin to take sugar in there, it has to go through that door, that insulin receptor door. But there's a problem there, and it won't allow it in. Mm-hmm.
Okay, now you said that was hypoglycemia for
Hyper is too much sugar in the bloodstream.
Okay,
Too,
so if a person is diagnosed with hyperglycemia, that means they have type 2 diabetes.
they have type 2. They have what's called insulin resistance. Insulin resistance. Because the insulin can't carry the sugar into the cell. Okay?
The reason I'm asking this question is because a nurse came into my home and she did a prick on my finger, she checked my blood, and she said, when was the last time you ate? I said, maybe a couple hours ago. And she said, when you ate that couple pieces of toast, she said, your blood sugar was low. So she said that I had hypoglycemia.
Mm-hmm.
You know. So basically she was saying that I had type 1 diabetes.
No. You're having problems with managing even your blood sugars. They're going too low. You're not whatever. That's a whole different lecture. We can discuss that afterwards. But the point here is that you have this mechanism in your body that perfectly manages your blood sugar levels if you give it the right inputs. And so somehow there's some kind of impairment with that system right now because insulin can't carry the sugar into the cell because there's some faultiness going on with the insulin receptors, okay? And we're going to look more into that. But over time, this leads to inadequate production and secretion of the insulin. And so these are the risk factors for type 2 diabetes. And basically the first one that you see on there is obesity, particularly central obesity. If you see someone that has that carries a lot of their weight, their fat around their belly, they're at an increased risk for developing diabetes as well as all of those other complications that come from it, like the heart disease and also the kidney failure and all of those things. Now, certain fats as well increase your risk factor, and these are basically trans fats, hydrogenated, partially hydrogenated. These kinds of fats increase your risk of diabetes. Now, another one that really increases your risk is refined carbohydrates. And what are refined carbohydrates? Simple sugars, candy, fruit juices, you can include those in there. White bread, white rice, things that most people in the world like to consume. What about sedentary lifestyle, inactivity? A lack of motion, a lack of exercise also increases your risk of diabetes. Your age, the older you get, you're more prone to getting diabetes. Why is that? People, when they get older, they become less what? Active. So they don't burn the calories that they eat. And so that can impact them as well. And so you find that, especially those over 65, you see a greater incidence of diabetes. And of course, genetics always plays a role. If there's someone in your family that has diabetes, that also increases your risk of developing diabetes. You've heard the saying that genetics, loads the gun, but lifestyle pulls the trigger. So a lot of it has to do with your lifestyle. Now, what about diabetes and obesity? Right? That's one of the main risk factors. And so what happens here? When fat cells are too full, they lose their ability to respond to insulin. And the fatigued pancreas eventually loses its capacity to produce insulin, and the blood sugar soars even higher. Okay, so fat is a real problem. Because over time, it fatigues the pancreas, right? And what produces the insulin? It's your pancreas, right? And you need your insulin to keep your blood sugars down, right? Because it's insulin that carries the sugar into the cells. And so eventually it'll lead to high blood sugars. And let's look at this illustration here. And what do we see there? We see there that your risk increases with extra pounds. Okay? For every 2 extra pounds of weight that are gained, it increases your risk by 4%. 4%. So what should we try and do? We should try and maintain an ideal weight for ourselves. Now, I don't know what your ideal weight, but mine is between 150 to 170 from my height. And so you can look that up. Just check out your BMI and see where you are. And if you're above what you should be, then you need to do something, right? You should either lower the amount of food that you eat or choose healthier foods, right? Less calories. And increase your activity level is the other thing that you can do. So obesity increases diabetes. Basically, that's the point here. What about fats and diabetes? We looked at one of the risk factors was fats, saturated fat and trans fats, hydrogenated, partially hydrogenated. And as you can see from there, if you're getting your fat from vegetable sources, those polysaturated, all of those good fats that you can get from nuts and seeds and avocados and all of those good things and olives, right? Your risk is really, as it says there, 0. But as you move away from that and you start increasing your total fat from calories, and you start eating more of the trans fats, and your cholesterol levels seem to go up, and your animal fat seems to go up, what does it do? It actually increases your risk of diabetes. So the saturated fat increase your risk by 64%. Does having high cholesterol levels increase your risk of diabetes? It says by 60%. Trans fats by 44%. And total fat as well by 40%. If your total fat is 40% of your calories, it also increases your risk. So is fat good? Some fat is good. It depends on the type of fat. Okay? But too much fat can be very harmful if it's coming from saturated fat and also from trans fats. Does God have something to say about fats? What does God say about fat? Well, it says in Leviticus chapter 7, verse 23, "Speak unto the children of Israel, saying, Ye shall eat no manner of fat, of ox, or of sheep, or of goat." Now, basically, what kind of fat do we find in animal products? Saturated fat. And God doesn't want us to consume these kinds of things because they do damage to our bodies. Fat is one of the things that impairs blood sugar management. Okay? Sugar just makes everything worse, but fat is one of the causes of blood sugar impairment. Okay? Sugar only makes things worse. So God knew about fats and He commanded Israel to avoid bad fat. We can't eat good fats from avocados, from nuts and seeds, but even that, we shouldn't eat too much of that fat. Is that not right? How much nuts should we eat per day? About a handful. If you're eating more than that, what's going to happen? It's going to increase your fat. You're going to get larger, and you're going to increase your risk of diabetes. Well, he has bigger hands, so he can. So that's per day. We got to grow bigger hands then. Okay. Now, as we read, another risk factor for diabetes is refined foods. Okay, refined carbohydrates. And refined and fast food also is a contributor to diabetes. Now, people who eat fast food more than 2 times per week increase their risk of diabetes by double. By double. And most people eat fast food twice per day. Most people, it's true. In the U.S. and in Canada and some other places, we consume a lot of fast food. And so we increase our risk. And so refined foods like donuts, people are used to getting donuts for breakfast. Blueberry muffins, bagels, croissants, all of these things are refined foods, and they are depleted of nutrients. You know that, right? You get more of the nutrients from the whole food. And the whole food also has this great advantage when you're dealing with diabetes. It also has fiber. But refined foods are depleted of vital nutrients, the minerals, the vitamins, the antioxidants that help to fight things like cancer, the phytonutrients. And so we need to eat more of the, what? Whole foods, the whole grains. Forget the white rice. Forget the white pasta. Eat the whole grain. Eat the brown rice. And there you'll get everything you need, plus that important fiber. And the other thing, too, that I want to mention here is that with the whole grains and the fiber, we're going to see that it's best to eat these foods in its most natural state because it really lowers insulin requirements when you're eating a lot of fiber. Now, let's look at soda drinks. Soda or liquid candy. 1 sugar-sweetened soft drink per day increases your risk of diabetes by a whopping 83%. I go to the supermarket. Sometimes I see what people have on their carts. And what do I see? I see a lot of soft drinks. I see a lot of Coke, Pepsi, or whatever it may be. And those things are highly sweetened with sugar. And we see that it does really increase their risk by 83%.
I've heard somebody say that eating sugar can increase your risk of diabetes. So I'm trying to connect. I could connect with obesity because the cells lose their ability to have it. But the sugar, eating more sugar, how does that increase your risk for diabetes if you don't already have a genetic something?
Well, the sugar, when there's too much sugar coming from that, some of it gets converted into triglycerides, and those are fats. Okay? And that's one of the reasons. But this is what a recent study found, is that sugar-sweetened soft drinks actually can increase your risk. And so what does sugar do to your body, especially when it concerns your immune system? Well, hyperglycemia is high blood sugars, right? And phagocytosis is the ability of your immune system cells to eat viruses and bacteria. And what does it do? If we look at this diagram here, it says that 0 tablespoons, if you're taking 0 tablespoons of sugar in 12 hours, 14 bacteria are eaten by your immune system. But if you consume 12 teaspoons of sugar in 12 hours, what happens? You decrease your ability to eat, your immune system's ability to eat harmful bacteria. Now it's 5.5 instead of the 14. Now, if you consume 24 teaspoons, what happens there? You only kill 1 bacteria. Americans are eating about 52 teaspoons of sugar per day. Well, that's a big hit on their immune system. So they can't really fight, bacteria. They can't really fight viruses. So that leaves them more susceptible to diseases, right? Catching the flu, catching colds, and many other things. So what are some of the complications from diabetes? Well, we have here retinopathy, and that is vision problems. Problems with your vision, it contributes to that. Polyneuropathy, and we're going to look at that. That's problems with your nerves. It damages your nerves, your ability to sense, to feel. It also contributes to heart disease, atherosclerosis. It also contributes to kidney failure. And it also, as we see here, it impairs your immune system, which makes you less able to fight infection and also cancer. These are the complications that are ahead for those that have diabetes. Now let's look at each of these. Retinopathy. Basically, high sugar levels damages the small blood vessels in the light-sensitive tissue of the retina. Okay, and without getting into too much of this, the National Eye Institute estimates that 40 to 45% of Americans, diabetics, are affected, with retinopathy, and 24,000 go blind each year. 24,000 go blind. It's the leading cause of blindness in the U.S. It's a very, very serious disease. What about polyneuropathy? Basically, it's damage, nerve damage, through the body. And basically, it's in the peripheral system. So you get damage, nerve damage, in your legs and your extremities and also in your hands. High blood sugar injures the nerve fibers. Most often damages the nerves in the extremities, like the legs and the feet and the hands. And what are some of the symptoms? Well, you lose feeling, numbness, tingling, and one of the most excruciating, pain. Some advanced diabetics, they have a lot of pain in their legs and in their feet. So it's very uncomfortable for them to walk. And one of the most important ways to treat diabetes is walking, exercise, and they can't do it because it hurts them so much. You never want to get to that point or allow someone to get to that point. Heart disease. Arteriosclerosis is hardening of the arteries caused by atherosclerosis, which is a buildup of plaque in the arteries. What happens is you have high cholesterol levels, and over time, they form what's called plaque. And this plaque causes the hardening of the arteries. And high blood sugars cause inflammation. Okay, this is the key here. Having high blood sugars in the blood causes inflammation, and inflammation makes plaque. Okay, makes plaque swell, and it swells to the point where it could rupture. And when it ruptures, it cuts off blood supply. So if you can think of an artery, right, as a hose, and if there's plaque there, say there's a stone there, it's blocking what? The flow. But if this plaque, if it bursts, then it'll do what? It'll block the whole artery. And so blood can't flow through, and blood can't get to the heart muscle. Right? What nourishes the heart muscle is the oxygen that's in the blood, the nutrients that's in the blood. If it can't get to where it needs to go in the heart, what happens? You suffer a heart attack. And so that's why it's so important that we control our blood sugars and that we bring them into normal range, which is between 70 and 90, the ideal range. Twice as likely to have a heart attack or a stroke. You're twice as likely to have a heart attack or a stroke. What about kidney failure? This is another complication. Well, high blood sugars damage the small blood vessels in the kidneys. You see how much damage it can do to your heart and also to your cardiovascular system, which includes your blood vessels? It really damages the small blood vessels in the kidneys. And it impairs the filtering system that leads to a breakdown. And when that system is impaired, that filtering system is impaired, it leaves waste material in your blood. Waste material like urea, ammonia, and creatinine. And eventually, the body retains a lot of water and salt, leading to edema, which is swelling. So you see a lot of diabetics, they'll have swelling in their legs and in their feet. And that's already starting to show that they're having kidney impairment, kidney filtering impairment. Their kidneys are not working properly. In the blood work, you'll see that their creatinine levels, which is a waste product, are very high. You'll see that their urea levels are also high. And these are not good things. And many times, over much time, diabetics will come down with kidney problems, and eventually they'll have to go for what? Dialysis. And then from there, total kidney failure, and they die. A person who's on dialysis doesn't live for very long. 2 years, a year, 2 years, and that's about it. And all of this could have been avoided. All of it could have been avoided. It says here, diabetes was listed as the primary cause of kidney failure in 44% of all new cases in 2011. This is very, very recent. It's a very, very serious disease. Very, very serious disease. Conventional treatment for diabetes, oral medication, diabetic pills, insulin injections, and there is some lifestyle changes that they ask for you to do, which is good. But that's the conventional approach. But here at Uchee Pines, we use mostly lifestyle modification, right? And what we use is God's plan. And it says here, together we can, with God, right? God's plan, we can stop diabetes. I really truly believe that. Because as a male lifestyle counselor, most of my guests, most of them have had diabetes. And I witnessed it for myself, that it's very, very treatable. And more than that, it's reversible with lifestyle changes. God's way works. God's way works. But we need to work together. It's a cooperation. It's a cooperation. So what does God's plan use? God's plan uses these remedies, these true remedies. Pure air, sunlight, abstemiousness, which is self-control, moderation, rest, exercise, proper diet, the use of water, trust in divine power. These are the true remedies. And we're going to look at some of these, okay? But I want to go through this slide here with you just to get this point across. This was the Egyptian diet. Hieroglyphics revealed sumptuous meals of beef, wild fowl, bread, fruit, vegetables, cake, wine, and beer. This is what they were eating and drinking. The Egyptian priests and their families ate foods that were laden with artery-clogging saturated fat. We've already seen that saturated fat increases your risk of what? Obesity, right? And obesity increases your risk of diabetes. And so this is what they were eating, and many Americans today eat a lot of what? Saturated fat. Saturated fat. They were also eating some good things, vegetables, you see here, and bread. But they were eating some pretty bad things. But let me also state that this was for the ruling class. This was for the priests and their families, for the pharaoh and his family, and for the upper class in the Egyptian society. But those in the lower class, they were subsisting on much simpler food. Okay? They didn't have this kind of fare. So they were eating a more vegetarian-like diet, and they did not suffer from the same diseases as the Egyptians. Now, God's plan includes a plant-based diet. With a plant-based diet, you get more nutrients. It's nutrient-dense. You get more of the vitamins, the minerals, the antioxidants, the phytochemicals, and you also get fiber, and fiber is so important, and we're going to look at that. With God's plan, nutrition that we use here on our guests, we provide them with very little sugar in their foods. Okay? And so there's no refined foods. We don't place white rice before them. We place brown rice before them, whole grains, and things like that. Limited starch. It is better to eat beans. Okay, because if you eat potatoes, for example, a potato is a very starchy food, right? It can really raise your blood sugar. So we limit the starch here. It's better to eat beans. They contain a lot of fiber. They also contain good carbohydrates and good protein as well. So it's a complete food. At Uchi Pines, the diets that we provide to our guests are very low in fat and oils. We use very little oil, if no oil, for our guests, period. And the foods have very little fat. And of course, on a plant-based diet, you're not consuming any cholesterol, right? Plants don't contain cholesterol. And so you don't have to worry about that. Because the number one risk factor for heart disease, for example, is cholesterol. And we were looking at cholesterol in the bloodstream over time. If it's not removed, it leads to plaque buildup. Okay? And plaque buildup can block the flow of blood, right, to the arteries and can lead to a heart attack. So we want to use God's diet. Small or absent supper is best. Did you get that one? Okay. Small or absent supper is best. So our diabetics, basically, we do not allow them to have supper. Okay, so they go on a 2-meal-a-day plan. And it really helps them to manage their blood sugars. They are blessed by it. Now, if they can't handle it, we don't force it upon them. We need to work together with them. We need to have their cooperation, right? And so But it is the best thing for them is to forgo the supper. And then when they get their blood sugar tested in the morning, they see the result. They come here with blood sugars over 200, and then they see their blood sugar starting to come down from 200 to 150, and then down, and then down, eventually into the normal range. All from using God's plan, His remedies. Now, what about fiber? These plant foods are very, very high in fiber. The whole grain products, the whole foods. Fiber protects against constipation, against cholesterol. There's soluble fiber and there's insoluble fiber. It's the soluble fiber that removes cholesterol from the bloodstream and takes it to the liver. And by the way, we never need to get cholesterol from outside sources, right? Because your liver produces all the cholesterol that your body needs. And so it reduces your chances of heart disease. So high cholesterol, fiber is really good for that. It's really good for heart disease because it reduces cholesterol. It's very good for high blood sugars. High blood sugars, and we'll look at that. And it reduces your chances of your risk of developing diabetes. And it's also good for certain cases of cancer and as well as obesity. Fiber makes you feel satiated, so you don't get hungry. It makes you feel full, so you don't snack in between meals. And so it's very good. Look at this. What do we teach here at Uchee Pines is that breakfast is the most important meal of the day. Out there, many people eat their biggest meal when? At supper. That's their meal. They have a very small breakfast. But here at Uchee Pines, we have the saying, you eat your breakfast like your lunch like and your supper like a pauper. A pauper. This is well and good, and we should keep to that. But if we're diabetic, what should we do with supper? We should avoid it altogether. We should avoid it altogether. And it says here, people who eat breakfast, they eat less total calories per day, so they keep their weight under control. They have lower cholesterol levels, and they have a 50% lower risk of diabetes. Someone here not eating breakfast? Yeah, breakfast is so very important. Now let's look at the importance of avoiding refined cereals for breakfast and things like that. The importance of fiber. As you can see from this graph, it's insulin and glucose. When you have a refined cereal breakfast, do you see the correlation between glucose and insulin in that graph? You see how when you have a refined cereal, it spikes. It spikes your sugar, and it also spikes your insulin, because you need insulin to bring that sugar into the cells. Okay? But when you have a mid-morning snack, when you eat in between your meals, you have a mid-morning sugary snack, look what it does. It increases your sugar levels again. It's a greater spike this time. And also your insulin levels as well. And then because your body takes that right away, it doesn't take long to digest that kind of sugar, what happens? You see that level right there? You move into the danger zone. You move into the hunger zone. You see right down there at the bottom? And so your body signals that I need more sugar for energy. So you get hungry, and so you take of a snack. Whereas a protein-rich lunch, you see less of a spike in insulin and sugar. Can you see that from the graph? And so there's less chance of being hungry at that point. But look what happens if you take in coffee. Coffee also spikes your insulin levels. Okay, let me make this point here. I don't have a lot of time left. But here's your concentration when you're eating a whole grain product, a whole food. You see the difference? You have less spikes in your insulin and blood sugars. And you don't suffer from hunger. You're not in that danger zone. Another important thing, and I'm going to take another 5 minutes, is this. You need to chew your food, really well. Thorough chewing increases early insulin response to eating. It decreases blood sugar and helps reduce food intake. So you need to chew your food well. But the biggest thing that you can do to help with your blood sugar levels is exercise. It lowers insulin requirements. It really helps to stabilize sugar levels. It increases glucose uptake by the muscles. So it helps with insulin sensitivity. It really improves insulin sensitivity. It enhances the ability to store glucose as well in the liver. And any kind of exercise is very profitable. And I have even studies here that really demonstrate that exercise is one of the best things that you can do to control your sugar in your bloodstream. Now let me describe this to you. What happens when you have a normal cell and how it uptakes the sugar? You see, in that diagram there, you see the insulin receptor. It's that upside down Y. And then you have the insulin molecule and you have sugar. And so in a normal cell, you see those insulin receptors, they drop down, and then insulin carries the sugar into the cell. Now what happens when you have an overfed cell? When you have an overfed cell and sugar uptake, because the cell is already full, it doesn't drop any of those insulin receptors. So where does the sugar stay? In the bloodstream. And so you have high blood sugars. Now let's look at a hungry cell. A hungry cell doesn't have any sugar in it. And so what happens, it drops all the insulin receptors that allow insulin to take sugar into the cell afterwards. And that's what happens when a diabetic starts exercising. Remember I said exercise is so important? Exercise really helps to get the sugar into the cells, and out from the bloodstream. It is one of the best ways to deal with diabetes. Now what about water? Water is also very important. And a recent study in the New England Journal of Medicine suggests that people with type 2 diabetes can significantly lower their blood sugar by increasing the amount of water-soluble fiber in their diet. So water works together with fiber to keep blood sugar levels down without them spiking. Stimulants like coffee, like alcohol, narcotics, and even smoking all increase your risk of diabetes. Sunshine is very, very important. It helps to regulate insulin synthesis and secretion by regulating calcium levels in the blood. And it reduces insulin resistance. Your sleep also has a lot to do with it. Chronic sleep deprivation leads to elevated levels of cortisol. That's one of the hormones. That's a hormone. And elevated levels of cortisol levels in turn promote insulin resistance, okay? It's one of those stress hormones. And sleep elevates them, and they also elevate insulin resistance. And it's recommended that we sleep how many hours? 7 to 8 hours per day. Now, this is the most important slide. If you have diabetes, there's hope. It's reversible. And the Lord says here in Exodus 15:26, today, the Lord is saying to you and to me, today, if thou wilt diligently hearken to the voice of the Lord thy God, and will do that which is right in his sight, and will give ear to his commandments, and keep all his statutes, I will put none of these diseases upon thee, which I have brought upon the Egyptians. Diabetes was one of the Egyptian diseases. And God promises that he will heal us of these diseases. For he says, for I am the Lord that healeth thee. If we hear his voice and obey his commands. And his commands is that we get enough water. His commands is that we get enough sunshine. His commands is that we eat a plant-based diet. His commands is that we get exercise. And if we do all of these things, the Lord promises to heal us. I believe it. I have seen it with many a lifestyle guest. If they stay on the program, they receive the benefits throughout their whole lives.